Welcome to the Grit and Grow podcast, where we talk to guests who are pursuing excellence in both sport and life, who encourage and motivate us to become better mentors, coaches, parents, and athletes. My name is Shane Sowden, head men's basketball coach at Briarcrest College, and also your co-host.
And my name is Justin Simpkins, co-host and director of Prairie Hockey Academy. Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Jason Romano. In this episode, Jason shares how a bold question from Coach Tony Dungy challenged him to live out his faith at ESPN, and how that moment shaped his path forward. We also dive into his journey of forgiveness and how letting go of bitterness toward his father brought unexpected freedom. It's an honest, powerful look at faith in action and the ripple effect that our stories can have. And if you're anything like me, this episode might just have you humming along to the tune Lemonade by Forrest Frank. Enjoy.
So you spent 17 years at ESPN.
Yes.
And then you make the decision to transition over to Sports Spectrum.
That's right.
And yeah, just tell us the challenges of sounds like working at ESPN was great. What was the challenge moving over to this new endeavor?
That was the challenge. I had a great job.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily looking to leave it.
No.
But my relationship, which we haven't talked about a lot, but my relationship with the Lord, with Jesus, was growing and growing. It started in 2001. I became a follower of Jesus. My brother led me to the Lord. It was an amazing moment, and just started growing and learning about who Jesus was. And I think I mentioned it earlier about the idea of working at ESPN. Well, ESPN for many years became the God of my life, became an idol of my life. It became my identity and where I was focused on, who I was set towards. And even after becoming a follower of Christ, ESPN still kind of played that role. I tell people I was an ESPN producer who happened to be a Christian for many years. But as 2012, 2013 started to roll around, I started to understand where my identity was supposed to be. And so I would say by that point, I was a follower of Christ who happened to be an ESPN producer, which is the proper order that it should be in. And when that happened, I started to grow, I think, in a really amazing way in my relationship with Christ, to the point where I wanted to do more for him. I didn't know what that meant, but ultimately it meant becoming an elder and a leader in my church, which was crazy for me to be on a church leadership board, which I still am today. It meant starting to preach a little bit at my church, which I'm very grateful I still get to do a little bit of today. But I did not see it leading to me leaving ESPN initially. But I just kept praying, and I kept feeling this nudge in my spirit to do more for God. And somewhere in 2015, I met someone who was doing the same job I was doing at ESPN for the most part, which was a social media manager, producer type of role, digital media role. But they were doing it for a church. And I met another person who was doing it for a nonprofit faith-based ministry. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's people doing the exact same job I'm doing, but they're what I would deem they were doing it for a greater purpose, to help share the gospel. And that's where it kind of creeped in my mind. I wonder if the Lord would ever release me, as I like to say, from ESPN to something else. And I started exploring the idea with some people in my circle, not about leaving per se, because I didn't know where I was going, but about the idea of leaving ESPN. Am I crazy to even think this? And most of them were very supportive and said, no, you're not crazy. Just make sure you're praying first. Make sure you're seeking God's will, not your own will. And I think as I started to get a little deeper into this, I kind of knew it was God's will, because it didn't make sense. There's no reason why I would want to leave ESPN. I still love my job. By the way, the last year back at Mike and Mike on ESPN was my favorite year of the 17 that I worked there. So I was loving my job, traveling, working on one of the biggest shows at the network, opportunities, lots of swag, by the way. Mike and Mike gets more swag, free swag, than any show I ever worked on. So I was walking out of there with backpacks and shirts and everything, every week it felt like. So I was enjoying the role that I was in. And yet I think the Lord does a stirring in us for a reason. And it was still there. Is it really, is my time up here? And ultimately, what that led to was a conversation with my now boss, Steve Stenstrom, who was the president of Pro Athletes Outreach and Sports Spectrum. He's a former NFL quarterback. And Steve and I just connected on social media very randomly, DM from me to him. And he called me back, and we spent an hour kind of catching up and learning each other's journeys. And I think initially when we talked, he hadn't even acquired Sports Spectrum. But we had talked, and I just kind of told him I was thinking about, what the Lord might be doing and where he might be leading me next. And then Sports Spectrum entered the picture for Steve. And I think it was a no-brainer for him to call me because of the skills and the experiences that I had at ESPN made sense to transition into another media company, but with a purpose to share the gospel, which is what Sports Spectrum is. And I was ready to go. I was like, okay, this is where you want me, God. And then he basically said, here's what we can offer you. And it was, 40% less pay in my, salary in my job. It was no benefits, no security, if you will. It was a 1-year contract position. ESPN, I was just a regular W-2 employee, full-time. I guess the security wasn't there either, but it was not a contract position. It was just an ongoing position until if it was ever going to be eliminated. With this position, it was 1 year, and then we'll reevaluate. So a lot of it didn't make sense. Like, why would you leave a very comfortable, high-paying job for this? But that's why I kind of thought it was from God. And for the first time in my life at 40 years old, I was like, okay, this is why it's not supposed to be comfortable. And, this is where the rubber meets the road for me. I could stay at ESPN, and who knows how long I would have lasted there. I don't know. They had a lot of cuts and layoffs for, I think, 5 rounds of layoffs since 8 years ago when I left. That's a lot. So I could have been involved in that. Who knows? And it was almost like I felt the Lord saying, just trust me. Trust me. I got you. And I remember talking to my wife and telling her about the 40% pay cut. You guys can imagine that if you're married, like what that conversation's like. And I just told her, I believe this is from God. And if it is, he'll make a way. That God will take care of this because we're following where he's directing our steps. If it's from me, if it's from Jason, it'll probably blow up in my face and we'll end up back at ESPN or somewhere else. I said, so I'm believing it's the Lord's plan, and let's see where it goes. Well, 8 years later, I'm still with them. I've been full-time since 2019, and 2 books, opportunities to write 2 books, speaking, like doors that opened that I never would have thought opened, happened because of that nudge, I guess, from God to just trust him. I never know what God's plan is, I think, fully until you look back. But I can tell you now, looking back after 8 years, like that was truly God's plan, even though I didn't quite understand or know that when I took those steps towards leaving ESPN and coming to Sports Spectrum.
I think this is the beautiful part of faith, right? And this idea of maybe faith in action, that it's hard to, I think you said it well, just in the sense that if it's from God, that it'll we'll be okay, right? We'll be looked
Take care
after.
of it. That's right.
And it'll take care of it. And that's probably a tough conversation for some people that don't understand the faith aspect and that. I think for some, and if they haven't read, I do actually have a copy of your book here as well with the uniform. Sorry, I covered my mouth with my mic, so no one heard that. But I have a copy of your book here with the uniform of leadership, and I think, I know in chapter 2 is called "Bloom Where You're Planted." Yes. And you detail a conversation in 2010. So we're talking 2017 now when this faith in action sort of happens and you take this leap. But I think it's probably important for people to understand that, God continues to put people in our life throughout our journey that in those moments that might be calling us up and towards something in the future. Mm-hmm. And, Coach Tony Dungy was in your studio with you that day and asked you a profound question. That you really struggle to answer as you write in the book, and then maybe a bit of I think you talk about it later on in your book, a little bit of humility perhaps happened for you in his assistant kind of saying, hey, like, you don't get what he's asking you don't get what but his simple question was, Jason, how do you live out your faith here? at ESPN. And
Couldn't answer it.
yeah,
I couldn't answer it. I didn't know how do you live out your faith uh, in a job where at that time your faith is in your job, right? Like the identity, the God of my life was ESPN. So I was a Christian, but I was a Christian on Sundays and Bible studies during the week. And I hoped I carried myself like a Christian at ESPN, but I don't think I was living it out. And so Coach Dungy asked me that question, and I'm like, this is Coach Tony Dungy asking me a question about my journey. Like, why is he even doing that?
he just pinned you down.
And it changed my life forever. Like, I still remember it to this day. We were in the green room. It was just like a little conference room, side room, waiting to go on Sports Center. We were just coming off of his interview on Mike and Mike in the Morning, and I was kind of his chaperone producer for the day, and taking him from show to show. And his assistant Jessica, who you mentioned, knew me from previous bookings and knew that I was a believer, or I would say I was a believer. I'll just say I think I was a Christian, but I wasn't living it out. But she knew that I was a believer, and so she's telling Tony like, "Hey, Jason's a Christian." And Coach Dungy comes to me and is like, "Hey, I hear you're a Christian. So how do you live your faith out?" And my answer was, "I don't know." And that's like the worst answer you can give if you want to call yourself a Christian. But
that like first things he asked you? Was it just like
he genuinely
very
asked,
early, like right off the bat?
it
Wow.
was about a half hour in to the day. So he got to ESPN, went on Mike and Mike, and then we end up in the green room just to kind of go through the rest of the day because the Mike and Mike hit was early that day, the interview. And so we end up like I said, a green room. We call it our green room, and we're just hanging out for probably 25 minutes. And what do you do when you hang out? You start talking to people, right? And Coach is sitting there, and of course, all of us in there was probably 4 of us. We're probably all wanting to pepper him with questions. And he turns it around right away, and he's like, "So Jason, it's so good to meet you. Thank you for." He was so gracious. "Thank you for walking us around today. Thanks for taking us from show to show. Jessica here tells me that you're a Christian. That's amazing. Let me ask you this question." And that's when he asked it. And I'm like, "Oh boy." Because I said, "I don't know." And he looked at me with that look that you give your kids when they just come back with a bad grade on a paper or something. And you're like, "Nope, I don't know." And Dungy looks at me and he just kind of shakes his head. And before he could even really respond deeply to when I said, "I don't know," that's where Jessica came in. And she stands there like with her arms on her hips. And we had been friends previously. So she was, probably felt comfortable to do this and just looked at me and she's like, "You don't even get what he's asking you. You don't get what Coach Dungy's trying to do here, do you? What he's trying to say?" And I'm like, "Help me, because I feel like a dunce right now. I don't know what I'm doing. Help me." And she said, "Well, look at where you work. You have an opportunity to impact as many people as possible every day. Thousands of people come through those walls and halls of Bristol, Connecticut every single day at ESPN. That's an amazing ministry you got there. Look at the people you can impact." And I always thought, if you're going to live out your faith, you got to do it in the confines of a church or a ministry or, a place like Fellowship of Christian Athletes or Athletes in Action or some of these sports ministries that are out there, Nations of Coaches. And obviously I didn't realize I'd be working with one of them, 8 years later, 7 years later. But at the time I thought that's how you live out your faith. Like you do it in a faith-based setting. And that's where Jessica was like, "No, look at the people you can impact every single day. The ministry that you can have right here at ESPN." And she said it. That's where the chapter for the second book came from. She said, "Until God calls you away someday," and we've just discussed this, he did, "but until he does, you are to bloom where you're planted right here at ESPN." And I thought, okay, I'd not heard that before, but it was like a light bulb went on above me. And I realized, oh yeah, bloom where you're planted. That makes total sense to me. I didn't know how you go about doing that exactly. That was where I went on like a 1 year, journey to figure this out. And I don't think it's very hard. I just think people don't realize how easy it is. It's just being yourself and loving and serving others and doing great work. But at the time, I took this huge, heavy responsibility. Like, oh yeah, I got to be a Christian now at ESPN. Let's go. Let's tell everybody about Jesus and see a revival at Bristol, Connecticut. That did not happen, and I probably would have been fired if I did do that. But what I tried to do is just, like I said, love and serve and care for my teammates, do the best work that I could do, and carry myself as an ambassador for Christ wherever I went. And it's because Coach Dungy asked that one question. So
Coach Dungy asked it, and then, let's call her Coach Jessica.
Coach Jessica, that's right.
Like, she stepped into the spot and was pretty bold to say, hey,
Yes.
wait a second, right? And I think there's a story there. A lot of our listeners, Jason, just for context for you, a lot of them will be student athletes. They'll be pursuing, they have a dream of pro, collegiate level hockey. It'll be parents of student athletes and a lot of coaches, and they'll come from mixes of all walks. So some with a faith background, some without. But I think you have a really strong message of this idea of, like, again, just bloom where we're planted is really important. Yes. However, what is that? I feel like that's kind of almost the genesis of this book, The Uniform of Leadership, because it's like throughout our life, we might change leagues. We're going to change teams. But the uniform that we're wearing right now reflects where God has called us to be. And it's like, I'll oftentimes lead with that conversation at the start of a year inside of our hockey academy, that it's no surprise to me that the 80 young men that are here are here.
That's right.
Because actually, I think you're here for a purpose, and you might not realize it right now, but the year's going to be really fruitful, and you might not know it for 20 years. And so it's just, but inside of that, how are we going to wear a uniform for the year? And are we going to wear it like the 03-04 Lakers, like you talk about, with, basically we're putting our uniform backwards, and it's going to breed a lot of conflict and contentment and selfishness and a horrible culture? Or are we going to wear our uniforms the right way and serve where we're planted, to love each other, to make our teammates better? And yeah, I'm talking about in practice, Mr. Iverson. It's, it's just like, how do we make our teammates better every day?
That's the kicker in this, or the reminder in this for everyone, wherever you're at in your journey, is to remember, like, don't go thinking so far ahead that you miss right where you are. And I got caught up doing that at ESPN. I thought I was supposed to be the next producer or the next this. And so my mind was so focused on where I was going that I lost where I was. And Jessica and Coach Dungy and that day helped me remember, like, each day is its own masterpiece. There's a reason that so many remember that this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. Like, a lot of people remember that. It's also, I think, sung in a lot of churches, but that is true. Like, that's where the genesis of the idea of blooming where you're planted comes from, is this is the day. We don't know about tomorrow. Tomorrow's not promised. You can look at any tragedy or any terrible situation like the one in Texas or anywhere and realize tomorrow's not promised. And so if we start thinking ahead too much, we're going to miss where we're at right now. And I recognize this not only in my job, but in church too. Like, I'm very connected to my friends at church. We serve at a young adult ministry, my wife and I, a young adult ministry, as leaders with a couple other friends. And they're so focused at 22, 23 on, where am I going to be when I'm 25? Where am I going to be when I'm 30? Am I going to meet the man or the woman of my dreams? Am I going to get married? Am I going to have kids? Am I going to have the job that I want? Am I going to have the house that I want? And I'm like, focus on right now. Like, you're 22, just be where you are today, right now. Tomorrow will take care of itself. By the way, pretty famous leader said that in Matthew 6, called Jesus. And he said, like, don't worry about tomorrow, because it has enough worry of its own. Focus on today. And that's so important to remember, I think, on our journeys, is because we're all guilty of it. I wonder where I'll be in 5 years or 10 years, when I'm 60, or, when I'm going to be 70. Am I going to be a grandfather? Where am I going to live? What I think about it. But if I obsess over it, man, I miss what today is going to bring. Today, right now, talking to Justin and Shane, like, let's just enjoy and bloom where we're planted right now at this exact moment.
And we could have a whole business conversation about this. Honestly, Jason, this idea of, like, ambition pulls us out of serving where we are at times. Like, it can have that real negative draw, which can lead to a lot of, and you've detailed this, about just like misery and frustration and anxiety. And we're unable as a leader to just be present with the people that are right in front of us at that moment. So we don't need to talk about that anymore. I just think there's a lot there to unpack another time. I know Shane, I want to let him in. Hey, it's Justin here. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that I'm a coach, a husband, and a father to 3 busy kids. A couple years ago, one of our daughters was really struggling with her sleep and her breathing and crowding in her mouth. At that point in time, we started looking into things that could help her. And I'm proud to say that we came across a company called Sask Mile. The team at Sask Mile was incredible with our daughter in helping us figure out a solution for her health. The team at Sask Mile made a real difference in her life, in her breathing, in the crowding in her mouth, and in her airways overall. My daughter's back to sleeping better, not grinding her teeth at night, and being able to just breathe, which goes a long way in her physical development. If you have a child that you're concerned about, whether they're snoring, mouth breathing, grinding their teeth at night, struggling with feeding, or just overall mouth development, take my advice. Reach out to saskmile.com. Their team there will offer consultations and incredible help for you. That's saskmile.com, saskmyo.com.
Jason, I want to touch on your first book, Live to Forgive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm part of a large group chat with probably a couple dozen men who are anywhere from like 20 to 50 years old, all different stages of life. And it's been pretty powerful to see these guys start opening up. And most of them are believers. Some of them aren't. And some of them are really curious. But these themes of something I've noticed, and even in my own heart, bitterness, resentment, around this theme of forgiveness. And I love how you just talked how like in 2010, starting to like, well, how do I, it's one thing to say I believe in Jesus, but then to start actually taking his teaching seriously, like to love your enemies and to forgive others. You're like, well, yeah, I can forgive. There's some really, I think a lot of guys are walking around with some wounds. And so you write this book where you got to put your faith into action now. And so just, if I can ask you just like a little bit of the backstory from that book and why that book first? Like, why did you choose to write that one first?
I certainly didn't want to, that's for sure. I don't even want to write any books ever, by the way. I don't enjoy writing books. The title Live to Forgive, if you write a book with that title, that kind of puts the onus on you to have to forgive every single time, right? That's hard. But I get why it's a struggle for so many, because it was a struggle for me for so many years. I grew up with in a very complicated relationship with my father, who was an alcoholic and who struggled for many years with drinking, and now it's anxiety and depression and some other things that he's battling even to this day. And so my dad was kind of on this roller coaster for many years of drinking, where when he was sober, he was great, good guy to be around. But unfortunately, the alcoholism and the drinking forced him into 2 divorces with my mom and with his second wife, my stepmom at the time, Patty. And so he's been divorced twice. He's lost his job multiple times, but most recently, his last job 25 years ago as a teacher, he lost that because of the alcohol. And he's just lived a really, really hard life. But he was also a very mean drunk. So when he was drinking, he would call and he would say terrible things about myself, my brothers, my mom. And, when you're 7 or 8 and you see your dad drinking, it doesn't really affect you much. When you're a teenager, you start to think about who you are and who he is, and you start to see it a little bit more. When you're in your 20s, you start to become an adult. And I think I just kind of separated myself from that. And I held on for many years into my early 40s, a lot of bitterness towards my dad. We would reconcile every so often. And when he was, sober for a few months, I'm like, all right, I'll talk to you. We'll see each other here and there. But when he was drinking, I often would either retreat, or if I got really angry, I would just get on the phone and scream right back at him and say things that I'm not proud of that he would say back to me. And by the way, a lot of this happening after I began a relationship with Jesus. So I don't think I fully understood about forgiveness and the importance of forgiveness. Fast forward to 2013, and my dad is in a real bad state at this point. Sadly, I would like to say that was his rock bottom, but it's not. He's going, what I think, through that right now, and that's another story for another time. But in 2013, I thought he hit rock bottom. He was basically mixing in the depression and the anxiety that had been caused for so many years in his life with drinking, which is not a good recipe. It's a deadly recipe. And he was basically at the end of his rope, I thought, and he tried to end his life, and he was unsuccessful, thankfully. At that time in 2013, he immediately checked himself into a psych ward, psychiatric hospital area. And I got the call that my dad, had tried to end his life, but that he was still alive. I was very numb when I got that call, very numb, did not really know how to feel. There was anger, there was bitterness. But about a week later, I got him on the phone and we talked for 15 minutes. And I had empathy for the very first time in my life towards my father. Empathy towards a man who probably didn't want to choose the life that he was living up to that point. And as I was growing in my faith as well, I verbally said to my father, I just want you to know that I forgive you. You don't have to worry about anything else. I'm cheering you on and you'll get through this, but I forgive you. Don't worry about the past or anything like that. I said those words. And I would say over the next week or two, as I started talking to my pastor and a few other people, I started to understand the weight of those words, not necessarily for my dad, but the weight for me. So it's one thing when people hear that you've forgiven them. It's another thing when you forgive someone and you understand that it was a weight that you were carrying and that weight is now off. And for me, I've discovered that forgiveness was never about anything my dad ever did. It was about the bitterness and anger that I was carrying in myself, and I was hanging on to it, kind of in chains, right? And I've heard the quote that says, to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner is you.
Mhm.
And I said, whoa. My reaction was just like your guys' reaction right now. When I heard that, I said, okay, first of all, I'm writing that down. And second of all, I'm challenged because I'm the prisoner. Like, it's not my dad. All these years, I thought it was my dad and he didn't earn it. He didn't deserve it. It's like, nope, you're the one, Jason. And after that moment of where my dad was at a low point, I started to understand like this forgiveness thing was for me, not for him. And oh, by the way, Shane, you mentioned this. It's kind of obligatory if you read scripture that you are to forgive every single time. Like Jesus does not sugarcoat what he talks about in scripture. So if I'm going to call myself a believer in Jesus and try to be Christ-like in the way that I live, I have to forgive every single time that I'm wronged. And obviously, I'm human. It doesn't always work perfectly for me. But Jesus said 70 times 7 is how many times you're supposed to forgive. He also said, if you do not forgive those that have wronged you, your heavenly Father will not forgive you. So he's pretty serious when he talks about this. And I think we need to understand as believers that forgiveness is the reason Jesus talks about forgiveness in such a serious way is because he sees what happens when you live in freedom and when you choose to forgive, when you live to forgive. Like there is a release of bitterness that I wish I could explain. I gotta say it's this peace that kind of surpasses understanding that Jesus talks about, that Paul talks about in the Bible. That's what happened with me. Now here's the kicker in this, and I know I'm going long, but I think it's important here. My dad has since relapsed. He went 10 years almost without drinking. He was on the right path. I thought he had this thing kicked and he was doing really, really well. And just a couple years ago, he relapsed again. And he's back struggling with mental health, with this stuff, with anxiety, depression. He's been in and out of hospitals. Again, I won't get into the nitty gritty details, but this was, Shane, a chance where it's like, okay, you wrote a book on forgiveness. Are you really going to live this out? Because it's all great when your dad's not drinking and everything's going great. But guess what? Now he's relapsed. And guess what? He said some pretty nasty things over the last couple of years when he's intoxicated. And praise God, that's all I can get. All I can say is give him the credit. But I truly don't think I have any bitterness towards him. I don't. It's a different 2 years of walking through this again with him than it was the first 40. And I'm very sad for him. I really am. And I still have to distance myself, and the barriers are important to put up for myself and my family when those things kind of come back into my life. But I don't have any hatred or anger towards my father anymore. I love him. I believe God's going to rescue him still. I pray for him every day. But I don't have any anger towards him or unforgiveness. Like that has been released by the power of Jesus, if I'm being honest with you guys, because that is not something I could have done on my own. But the Lord has delivered me from that. And I believe when we choose to forgive and when we enter into a relationship with Christ and we read scripture, we can live in a freedom that we never thought we could before. Because there's a lot of pain and hurt in the world. And a lot of people have gone through a lot of hurt. I venture to say everybody has been hurt and struggled with bitterness and anger at some point in their life. But when we can release that to the Lord and let him be the judge, I'm telling you, you walk around with a freedom that just, it's really hard to explain, but to me, it's only from God. So I know that was a long answer, Shane. I apologize, but it's the most important work I've ever done in my life is forgiveness and the idea of forgiveness and studying it, reading scripture, and then writing the book and talking about it. I've never been more motivated to do any other work than this for as long as I live. I'll do other work, and I love sports and I love faith and Jesus, obviously telling those stories. But the forgiveness book that I wrote still, I think, will go down as the most important work for me personally that I've ever done.
Thanks for sharing, Jason. It's a powerful story. And I'm grateful for you coming on to share it and to share your heart and to share, just your journey and your story. And Coach Dungy's question to you, which truly catapulted you to a spot where today you're using your platform to lead people to forgiveness, to unshackle themselves, and to tell them about Jesus. And like you said, that puts you on a stage with Daryl to talk about the same thing. You're you're an athlete hero, right? And now you guys get to be on the stage to talk about forgiveness together.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick because I honestly realized I don't think I answered Shane's question. Like, why did you write this book? And the answer was because I started sharing the story with people and saw how prominent unforgiveness and anger was in a lot of people. And I wasn't planning on writing a book about it, but I did want to help people as best I could with my own story. And that's what led to meeting an author and then meeting another guy who helped me write the book. And we just were like, yeah. And I had to get permission from my dad. That was my own personal conviction to tell his side of the story. I had to make sure my family was on board with telling such a personal story about our family and what we walked through. And they all said, if it can help one person, please write it. And so that's why we wrote it. Yeah.
Well, it's so, if you think over the centuries of the church and people following and putting their trust in Jesus, one of the most profound impacts on culture, because it's so countercultural, is when people see this laying down and forgiving when it makes no sense, because you have every right to hold on to that bitterness and be angry.
That's right.
And then for people to see, well, how can you forgive that? And then to see you move on and to love and to serve and to release that and surrender. Then people they're like, well, I want what he has. And that comes back exactly right to Tony Dungy's question.
Yeah.
Well, how are you living this out? They're like, well, I'm not really. But then later, on, now look. And
I just preached a sermon at my church a couple of weeks ago on what we called the ripple effect and the idea of the pebble dropping and how it can impact so many. And I just started sharing my story and told people, like, that's your job. I was talking to believers mostly in my sermon, like, share your story. And your story could impact, if it impacts one person, well, that one person could take it and impact 20. And those 20 could all take it and impact another 20. Now you just multiply that and you're up to 500 people. That's a lot or more, thousands of people. And you don't realize how important it is to share your story. And that's why I said, if you've had an encounter with Jesus and you have a story to tell, please tell it. Like, don't hold it for yourself. And if you've forgiven and you know that God has released you from anger and bitterness, man, tell someone. Maybe you don't want to tell the whole world, which I get, but tell someone, because someone might tell someone who might tell someone. And now you're talking about what I believe is true discipleship and helping others grow in their walk with Jesus. And also, like you said, Shane, who knows who could hear it? That one person just needs to hear it. And it's funny, I almost preached on Live to Forgive that day a couple of weeks ago because I just felt like I haven't preached this sermon in a few years, and there's a lot of new people at this church, and they still need to hear about forgiveness because it's not a one-time, instantaneous, microwavable thing. It's something that we need to walk through every single day on our journey. So at some point I'll preach it again, but just the idea of the importance of sharing our story, I think, can help other people. Why would we hold on to that? Why would we not want to share? You may not write a book or be on a platform or a stage to preach a message, but there's people in your life that need to hear what you've walked through and how God has helped you through it. So tell them.
Yeah, you never know who you're going to connect with, and then it's always a great reminder on the flip side, like we ourselves are forgiven and we don't deserve it. Like
Yes.
it's the gospel message, and it never gets old. And
Never.
when we take a step back and like we're capable of horrific things, and Jesus paid the price, and when he said it was finished on the cross, it is. And then
Yeah.
to walk into that freedom, um, you never stop preaching the gospel to yourself. You just continue to just live in it every day, and then it gives you that power to forgive in those, to live it out when it's really
100%.
hard. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, and we're not God. We're terrible gods. Let's trust in the one who is, and thank God for His grace and mercy every day. So
100%.
Thanks for your time, Jason. This has been really refreshing, and I know I'm taking a lot from it. I know that Shane's in a group of, a large texting group with men who are husbands and fathers and who are struggling with forgiveness and bitterness. And there's a whole piece of this whole side of a men's ministry conversation we could have that I do think, maybe that's just the echo chamber I'm in, but I do think that men oftentimes struggle with this idea of forgiveness. And so I appreciate that. And I trust today's conversation will have a ripple effect. So appreciate you.
I hope so. Thanks, guys, for having me. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Grit and Growth podcast. We hope that you enjoyed today's guest and the answers that they were able to give and the stories they were able to tell. If you did enjoy today's episode, we'd ask that you would just follow or subscribe to our podcast. It does help us get the word out in our message. Thanks again. Have a great day.